Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cinema Savvy. I'm your host, George Aldridge, and today we are continuing the Infinity Saga Retrospective as we approach, finally, the first appearance of Captain America in Captain America, the First Avenger. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Chris for another Phase 1 MC Retrospective, and rejoining us for the second time at the time of recording, we have Theo back following on from your appearance on The Incredible Hulk. Thank you for coming on for this one, because I'm very excited to talk Captain America. It's been a long time sort of getting into it, and I don't have to interrogate you now as well in terms of what's the favorite MCU character, Avenger, whatever you want to call it. I haven't done a scoreboard yet, but for you guys at home that might not know this, Theo, you've had a couple of videos since. Currently, in third place, Hawkeye is on 1. Second place, Thanos. Sorry, I still can't get over that. Charlie's probably fuming. Second place, Thanos is also on 1. And in the lead by a country mile, we've got Cap with 5. And both of you picked Cap as your picks, which is going to make tonight, I think, a little bit funner, because in terms of character arcs, forget actual character development of literal time, we have a World War II film here with the 1940s, and look how it ends in Endgame and stuff we don't know that's coming. Hey, the WandaVision finale's come and gone. Maybe he appeared in that. Maybe he was the super secret cameo. If you go to our video from the other day, you'll find out that we were probably massively wrong as well. But firstly, I just want to check, how are you both tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing good. This one's going to be really fun to talk about. I had a blast watching this one again today in preparation for this review. A lot of interesting stories about this one. And yeah, of course, like Cap's my favorite member of the Avengers, is my favorite character of the MCU. So it's going to be really fun talking about this first one today.
Yeah, I mean, I always love revisiting this one. I'd probably say I think it might be the one I've watched the most times, maybe like the second most, if you probably behind Infinity War and Endgame now. I mean, I'm still wishing maybe I changed my Cap selection to Justin Hammer. I did mention Justin Hammer last week. He deserves more love. Get him in Armor Wars. That's all I'm going to say.
I mean, I would be down for that. He got a lot of love in the Iron Man 2 video. Maybe we'll have a discussion one day on is it Sam Rockwell's best dancing performance? I think that's maybe a battle of the brackets for another time. Maybe it's a discussion for another time. But yeah, I don't think anyone can ever complain about more Sam Rockwell. Unfortunately, we're not going to be having any more Sam Rockwell Marvel videos, at least. Wonderful actor. And I'm going to use it as a really pathetic segue, because I would much rather talk about Sam Rockwell than bring up this horrible schedule once again for everyone at home. We are on number 5 of 23 in the Infinity Saga Retrospective. I guess we can say the last film before it all changed. I know that everything changes film by film, but certainly when you had that first Captain America release, no one knew what was about to happen with the Avengers. So I'm going to use that as a really polite segue to talk about the Avengers video, which will be the next retrospective. However, we're here to talk about Captain America, the First Avenger. So we want you guys at home to comment along with us tonight. We are pre-recording this, of course, a couple of weeks in advance. However, that being said, we want you to do comment below. We'll be premiering it. We'll have people commenting with you. And if you do like these videos, if you like Captain America, is he your favorite Avenger? Comment it down below. Maybe we'll even have a tally chart of everyone that comments for their favorite Avenger. So keep that going. And of course, if you do enjoy our content, do subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot of stuff going on, and the best way to find out what videos we're going to be doing is by getting us on our social medias, which is Facebook Cinema Savvy, Twitter at cinema_savvy, letterboxd.com/cinema savvy, and we have a link to the TeePublic store in the description below. Now, that being said, it's time to get into this film. It's going to be a really interesting one for us all to go back to. And I'm going to start again with that question. Can you guys remember the first time you watched this, or sort of your memories with that for the very first time?
I remember sort of my mental state watching this film for the first time, and just how my opinions have changed on this film over the years. So this came out a few months after Thor, didn't it? And it was the same year. I don't know how many months exactly it was, but I talked about this in my Thor review. Loved that film. And I knew that Captain America was the next one. And Captain America at the time as well, it was very similar. I really didn't like the Superman character, that kind of Gary Stu, perfect at everything, poster child, truth, freedom, justice, the American way, all of that stuff. I didn't gravitate towards those characters. I always found them really boring, Captain America included. So when the film was coming out, I knew I had to see it because I knew that it was building to Avengers at this point, and it was another comic book film that I had to go and see. But I had absolute complete apathy going to watch this film, and I don't like going into a film with a bad attitude. But I will say I went into this one with a bad attitude. I kind of went in wanting to hate the film. And I didn't connect with the character at all. Again, I thought he was this prissy, just, perfect at everything, just prolific hero. And I didn't like that. I didn't care for that. I didn't like him as much as Thor or Incredible Hulk. I thought you've got this guy who's in a literal technologically advanced robotic suit. You've got the Incredible Hulk who needs no introduction. You've got Thor who's a god. And then you've got a guy who's just like a bit beefy and wears an American uniform. That was it. So I didn't like the film, and it was a film that I think I only went back to it once when I got it on DVD. I still got it on DVD for some reason as part of my Marvel collection at the time. And it wasn't until The Winter Soldier, I know we're not talking about The Winter Soldier today, but I'm sure we'll be comparing elements to it and story threads that lead to it. It wasn't until I watched Winter Soldier, so even after the Avengers film, because I still couldn't stand Captain America in the first Avengers film, when I hit Winter Soldier, I don't know what it was. It was literally within the first 5 minutes of that film. I don't know what the Russos did. Something happened at the beginning of Winter Soldier where I did a complete 180 on Captain America. But that being said, although I've had that 180 and he's since gone on to go from my least favorite member of the Avengers to my favorite member of the Avengers, I never went back to this film. So it's been very interesting going back to this today, especially now that we're even past Endgame and, charging into Phase 4. To see where it all started with this character. And there's so much that I missed watching this film for the first couple of times that's been completely recontextualized for me. Emotional beats that already were impactful within the film are now way more impactful when you've seen the entire MCU through to the end. So that's probably my most involved story based on just going from a completely different state on a film to a totally different one after all these years. So yeah, it's been a character development for me. It's been a journey with this film, this character.
Yeah, I think what you say about likability as well. I think now that we can see it as a whole in the entire picture, I'm sure we'll talk about story beats a bit more later on. But he has to come across as that whiter than white patriotic symbol in order for us to get what we get in the Winter Soldier and get what we get in Infinity War and all of that. And I think. And obviously, the same character he is in this, he's basically in Avengers as well. So for that you sort of, sacrifice Chris Evans' acting ability in this film in order to tell the story, which is, I think, what I don't know if they knew it. They probably didn't know at the time, but obviously, leading on, Marcus and McFeely would write Cap all the way through to the end, and I think that's why his story beats are probably hit better than everyone else. I think as far as seeing the film for the first time goes. I do remember going to the cinema to see it. I can't remember how old I was. I was pretty young. I just remember being like, why is the guy that was from Fantastic Four playing Captain America? I don't understand. This makes no sense to me whatsoever. I was like, wow, he's tiny. They've made him small and now he's big. But I do think, looking back at it now, obviously going back to rewatch it for this as well, and I've seen it quite a few times, the CG is quite good. I think it stood up. Like, I know we talked about when we did the Incredible Hulk one last week, we talked about the CG on the Hulk. They perfected that just purely over the course of time because technology got better. And I have no doubt they would do small Cap better today. But I think it still stands up quite well, even on a TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because there's so much to take in of Cap. But I'm going to follow, sort of seeing it for the first time. I remember when I heard the news that the guy that played Johnny Storm, is it Johnny Storm? It's been a while since doing Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, he's going to be Captain America? And I was like, what's going on here? Because I loved that first Fantastic Four film. I would say I was the perfect age for it. Never liked the second one much, even there's only a couple of years older. I think it came out right at the perfect time. And I didn't know a lot about Captain America. I didn't sort of grow up reading comics at that age. It was more sort of the sort of years that followed this film and the Avengers one where I've really got into it more. I'd read a couple as a kid, but not storylines and stuff like that. And I remember my dad always liking Captain America, even when I was little. Whenever these films would come out, he'd always say, really hope they do a film like Captain America or Thor. And they're the two that he remembers reading. And Doctor Strange. I mean, Chris, we've both had this chat. For some reason, we think there's some sort of age thing where everyone sort of older than us always knew Thor, Captain America, and Doctor Strange.
That's strange.
I don't know why. It's really not strange. Don't excuse that pun, but I always knew of him. I knew of the shield, and I knew he'd punch Hitler because that was a famous thing.
Yeah.
And I remember when this film was coming out, I saw those trailers and I was really excited. And one of my favorite genres is war films, and we don't get many of them. And I think when you do get a good war film, that's always something to be said. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say this is Saving Private Ryan. Absolutely not. This is a comic book film set in World War II, and from a new perspective, it was amazing to get that, because the question I had was, okay, how's he going to be in the Avengers? And I didn't know the full comics. I knew there was stories of him frozen in ice and all this stuff, and I was so hyped for this film to come out. I don't know why. I remember saying in that Thor video that I wasn't bothered by Thor. All I cared about was Captain America, and it came out, I think, in the summer of 2011. I remember going with loads of my friends from school at the time. It was this massive deal for a lot of us. I made them stay for the credit scene, which we'll talk about later, because that was a kind of game changer, but not for credit scenes reasons. And I had a really good time with this. And as the years went by, I think when you bring in the Winter Soldier Civil War, I guess Cap's arc after you, it's really easy to forget about this film. And I don't mean it as a criticism of the film. I think it's another, maybe it's phase one as a whole, but people just seem to just pass it and they just forget talking about them. And because they didn't come out in the last sort of 5-6 years, they're no longer that important, because it didn't have the Infinity, well, this one does, but because it doesn't have that Infinity Stone storyline per se, it's very much like, oh, it's pre-event. It's like pre-Avengers. It's like BBY and Star Wars stories. Like, yeah, that was before they all teamed up and everything changed. And going back to this, I thought was just a fantastic way of realizing that, not that I was wrong, that yes, you've got, to me, modern masterpieces in Civil War and Winter Soldier, but that first film is bloody phenomenal as well. And I think that's so cruelly not spoken about. And that's why I like doing stuff like this. We get to talk about the film that no one speaks about, that I don't think me and Chris have ever had this discussion about Captain America 1. So it was amazing just chatting with you today before the video, talking about what we knew. But in terms of how opinions change as well, I think that's also worth mentioning, as you said, Chris, that certainly in Avengers 1, maybe even he doesn't get as much in Age of Ultron, that the Cap character's not the Cap we get in Endgame that lifts up Mjolnir. There's always been teases, and I think because, to me, of how underused he was in that first Avengers film, and I'll bring it down to a name that can't be spoken about too much, I guess, at the moment, because we don't know what else is going to come out, but the Joss Whedon effect, that I don't think Joss Whedon knew how to write Cap. I don't think he knew how to have him in. Chris, you mentioned to me earlier a really good point actually about the Justice League. And it's that kind of, there's some Superman comparisons, I guess, we might get into at some point, but I think this film is one of the best origin stories, not just of the Marvel films, but of most superhero films. I think a character arc, looking at the start of this film, looking at this film, everything was in place for what came down the line.
Yeah, and after watching this today, I think this is unseated Thor as my favorite sort of like standalone phase one film, if you will. After this point, after the Avengers, they all sort of like fell into that formula, I would say, the Marvel films, the Marvel formula. So it's quite nice going back to these like older Paramount Marvel ones, because there is a difference there. There is a distinct difference with the films and sort of how they're structured, how they're framed, how they're put together, and they didn't get so, I don't want to say machine-like, because I still do like a lot of the other Marvel films, but they definitely feel different when you watch them. They hit differently when you watch them. And yeah, something came together with this film for me when I watched it again today. It's a perfect film. It does everything that it needs to, and we'll go into like all the specifics in a minute. But just really quickly, the director, I think, is absolutely perfect for it as well. So Joe Johnston, it was a name that I've heard of, but I went and sort of like refreshed my memory, and I can absolutely see why he was hired, because he directed a film called The Rocketeer, which is a very similar film. It's set in exactly the same time period, World War II. The Nazis wanted to take over the world, and it's a superhero film as well, although the Rocketeer as a character is probably closer to Iron Man, this sort of like technologically advanced guy who flies around on a jetpack. So I think it was the perfect director for that, and I think he brings that sort of like family superhero film quality to this film, and really nails just the character, every aspect of it. And there's favorite moments we'll talk about later, but the montage sequence, just little bits of details that you can recall from the comic books, the punching Hitler, for example, which he does over 200 times apparently in this film. It's just the homages to knowing and perfectly understanding who the Captain America character was, where he started off, what he was originally created as, because he was created as a propaganda piece, the character in comic book history. and they acknowledge that. But I think although it's a period film, they modernize that take on the character. They draw reference to the fact that he is that character, but they work it into the story that Captain America wants to be more than that. He doesn't just want to be a mascot. He wants to get stuck in. So I was just sort of confronted more of that today watching this film, just how amazingly, like 100%, they actually understood and nailed the character in his first origin film and provided everything you need to. It's a shame because when you think of Captain America, personally, to me, my limited knowledge on the character, I think of that period setting because that's fundamentally where he started out as the comic book. And I love what they did with the period stuff in this film in the World War section, that I would have loved them to have gone on for multiple films within this time period, because I sort of like can't get enough of it and seeing Captain America in that time period. But I know that by the end of the film, you know, Avengers is coming out next year. We've got to get him to the modern day. But it still feels like they cover everything. They cover all the emotional beats. It sets up all of his friends and Bucky, who will obviously go on into the Winter Soldier. Threads and emotional beats that'll pay off at the end of the saga itself. So it's just a perfect film. It's just a perfect film. I would say, you know, just as an overall, the villain side of things, you could argue that they're two-dimensional, but we're dealing with Nazis here. Like, I don't really think you can have sort of like three-dimensional bad guys. It's kind of like the bad guys in the Indiana Jones films, right? It's just the Nazis want an artifact or a historical thing or a mythological thing that's going to make them take over the world, and Captain America or Indiana Jones has just got to go and stop them. So it's surface level, but it's perfectly adequate for what the film is and what it's trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, and Joe Johnston was actually an assistant director on Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think that's why there's a lot of story beats from Raiders in there, which I think does work quite well. I think what you were just talking about, the world in general, I think the world building in this is really good. And as much as maybe like you can say, obviously the two-dimensional bad guys, or the fact that it gets sort of a bad rap for being maybe a lower tier Marvel film, I think there's a reason that so many of the story beats from this film crop up later on. And I think it's because it's set well. And I think they, like Marcus and McFeely, ingrained it so well in the script. As much as I don't know how much of an involvement Joss Whedon maybe had to, I don't know, lead it up to Avengers, but I mean, I personally don't think he handles the character at all well in Avengers. I think it's a lot better here and down the line. But to set it up the way they did, and especially to have like almost, well, not to make this in an Endgame spoiler special thing, but like to have the end of your saga revolve around something that happens in this film, I think gives this film the merit it deserves.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with this. There's so much to unpack. Literally, I mean, you've got Cap, that's one thing, but Chris, as you said, you've also got Bucky, you've got Peggy, you've got the environment. I'll talk about the world building, actually. I think we'll talk about probably Peggy, Bucky separately in their own little thing, because those guys obviously go on to have their own arcs down the line. One even is, well, both of them spin-off TV shows now, actually. God, I forgot about that. And the setting is interesting because when you look at so many World War II films, it's that, I'm not using this as an insult, but they are so aesthetically not depressing, but they want we're going to go to an old 1940s base or villages that haven't necessarily been done up and repaint some of the walls, or they're looking for that historical authenticity. And I think the Indiana Jones stuff was great to bring in because it does feel like they're very much the Nazis from them. You don't need to market the villain as being Nazis. It markets itself for them. But when you're in that world, when they're running down the streets or when they're on the battlefields, it feels very much like those sort of pulp comics, which again goes back to those Captain America origins. And even the set design, it looks like a comic book. It doesn't really feel like it's trying to be some gritty, dark masterpiece. I don't know if that's me maybe overthinking something, but the whole environment, I think, builds up to this. And because he's quite, I don't want to say a cheesy character, but because, again, he's that propaganda piece, why would you take the propaganda piece and dress him up in this really sort of factoid setting of you must be bleak and depressing? And I know this is probably going to lead on to a very brief Man of Steel thing I've spoke about with Chris, but certainly in this one more than others, that it is that, Superman Marvel character. And, what's his kryptonite? Well, he kind of doesn't really have it in this film. And I think the other films address it down the line. His kryptonite is actually is himself as a person, the time setting, his friends being foes, and all that kind of stuff. But in this film, it's that really simple origin story. And I think they build up around it. And so much of it is that supporting cast that he doesn't become the character he is without the other characters around him. Because the time is one thing. His sort of loyalty to I don't want to say America, but one of my favorite scenes of the film is Stanley Tucci, who's amazing in this, when he just says, "So you want to kill Nazis?" And I remember seeing that as a kid, and he's like, "No, I just don't like bullies." And it kind of hits home. And I'm not someone that got bullied at school, but when you've got scrawny Cap, small Cap, and he just wants to keep enlisting because he just wants to, he's morally in the right place. And it might be seen as slightly cheesy, but I think, again, knowing where we are down the line, sort of 10 years down the line, going back to this, it's that actually, again, it's everything we see from him set up, and it's that question, is he worthy? He's always been worthy from the very get-go. And even within the context of this film, that's why he's the super soldier. He's not the super soldier because he's the scrawny, skinny one. He's the one that jumps on the grenades. He's the one that uses his brains, and he's everything they were looking for. And it's that, don't judge a book by its cover thing. He was the best soldier at the lot, and that's why he picked him. And there's just so much to unpack.
Yeah, and I mean, basically just what you said there, and I think that's what makes Captain America stand above the rest of the superheroes. I was just thinking about that as you were saying it, that, Tony Stark wasn't necessarily a good guy. He wasn't necessarily a bad guy, but, he was basically war profiteering, making weapons of mass destruction, just reaping the benefits of it, just living the high life. And it wasn't until he went through the change that he does in that film where he had a completely different outlook on life. You have, the Hulk who does what he does and is very sort of like lonely, isolated man, but can cause serious destruction and harm to people. You've got Thor, who was very arrogant, but Captain America didn't have to go through something to become a hero. He already kind of was from day one. And I think that's what sets him apart. And as I've got older, I've kind of had an appreciation more for these traditional heroes. Like I mentioned, Superman as well. Very, you've got sort of Superman for DC. You've got Captain America for Marvel. Very similar characters in that respect. And I love that. Yeah. And it's those moments that just really build the character at the beginning. The scrawny Cap, it was kind of distracting when I first saw it again after all these years. It's very uncanny valley. I think that's just down to the fact that in our heads, we know what Chris Evans looks like, the real Chris Evans. And then when you see something where, I don't know if it's his head is too big for his body, but it kind of looks like a bobblehead. It looks a little strange, but after a few scenes, it was fine. And it didn't like stand out to me too much. It was just like the first scene, I was like, whoa, okay, this is Captain America. And then I was fine with it after that. But yeah, it's the moment where he jumps on the grenade. It's where, although like all of his comrades and everything in training are like trying to jeopardize him, it's the bit with the barbed wire. He's still, it's that fighting spirit. It's that persevering. The scene with the dustbin lid where he's getting beat up in the alley is like one of my favorite still shots of the whole film, where it's the precursor to the Shield. Love all that stuff. Love all that setup. And it just makes it, even as a self-contained film, the transition to when he does become the actual, muscle-bound hero, all the more better, because we've seen the progression, but he's always had that spirit. I think that's why I love Cap the most out of all of them, really.
Yeah, and I think what we're saying about like revisiting this film now, you can see why, unlike, stuff, there's a lot of stuff in Thor, and obviously maybe the Incredible Hulk is an entire film that's almost been retconned out of existence. Like, let's really put that in a bin and never think about it again. I'm talking like Thor's eyebrows, which, I mean, unbelievable. Why did they bleach his eyebrows? I have no idea. That's so strange. Why has Kenneth Branagh done that? But yeah, like the thing obviously with his catchphrase and obviously the stuff with Peggy that we see later down the line. I mean, I would have loved to have seen even more Peggy. I thought Agent Carter was a great show, just on a little bit of a tangent, and I would have loved to have seen more of that. And I'd still love to see more Haley Atwell in it. Not that I imagine we ever will now, but yeah, I think from the story beats, the only thing that you've already mentioned, Chris, it is the Red Skull stuff. And he does come across a little bit caricature for me, but I think that's more Hugo Weaving than the character as a whole, to be honest. Because obviously Hugo Weaving, he is an eccentric actor, I think, to say the least. But yeah, other than that, like again, there's a reason why I think I've revisited this film, probably other than the top tiers in Infinity War and Endgame, more than any other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Before we get to the supporting characters, let's talk Red Skull properly, because I don't know much about the comics. Actually, that his arch villain is a man called the Red Skull, who has, as you'd guess, a red skull, and he was a Nazi officer. And again, that Indiana Jones comparison, it's that kind of, how do we have a bad guy that we know is evil from his costume, but also what's he going to take it to the next level of being that over the top caricature? And I love the build up of this, even though it was in all the trailers of him taking his mask off. Everything about Hugo Weaving is, I've not seen. Right, I'm going to be honest. I've not seen masses from him, except I think Lord of the Rings, the first Matrix film. I don't know if Transformers is allowed to count. I've not seen many Hugo Weaving films, so it's a bit of an enigma. But I only ever see him as Red Skull. That shows more my age maybe than anything, because this was probably around the time I saw Lord of the Rings for the first time, and I was like, "What's Red Skull doing in this series?" Anyway, he's kind of, I want to say, a weak character. Not that he's not developed, but there's clearly something else going on. But because he's a Nazi, it's very much, it's kind of what you said, Chris. It's that you can't really have a, don't sound horrible, a three-dimensional Nazi. You can have characters like Eamon and Goethe and Schindler's List, but that genre of film is going to allow you to deep dive into someone like that. Whereas this film kind of can't. This is setting up Captain America, the propaganda figure. So, the Americans need to be good and the Germans need to be bad. And I think he does it in the right way. Shout out to Toby Jones, who is phenomenal, as well as his little pet sidekick. Again, an unreal supporting cast in this film. Pretty much everywhere there's great characters and actors. But yeah, Red Skull's kind of, and every time he gets in, he's like, okay, so he's a Nazi. What terribly bad, obvious thing is he going to do? And, I don't mind it in origin films. I don't know if I've said this in the past, but certainly now, I think there's been a shift in momentum. I'm going to say down to Batman Begins. I know this is a couple of years after, but very much in the early days of comic book films, because they were this unknown quantity, they would get your main villain out of the way straight away. You've got to put your biggest villain first. You need to market this film. People have probably heard of the villain. I always think of X-Men having Magneto. I always think of Spider-Man going with Goblin, then Doc Ock. There's so many films do this. And again, those early MCU films also did that. And nowadays we're in a position where they're not going to greenlight a film. They're going to greenlight a trilogy or a 9-picture contract. And they're going to build up to this villain, and you're not going to get them up front. And I think Man of Steel did that again. They put Zod in. Zod's obviously one of his main villains, but Lex Luthor is the ultimate big bad, and they saved him for the second film and didn't go down too well there. And then Doomsday was chucked in down the line and all that nonsense. But Red Skull's a weird one, because when you have these origin films, you don't really have time to develop the villain. I don't know if that's me looking at it as an understatement, but you can't afford to give the time away to set them up. And some films can do it perfectly. I'm thinking like Batman 89 and some other ones. But when you've got someone that you think could pop up in 4 or 5 films, introducing him in that very first time is a tricky way to do it when you're setting up your own hero. And I don't know if anyone's got the sort of same mindset as me, where Red Skull goes under that trap, that if it had popped up in a later Marvel film, maybe it would have been easier. Maybe that it took so many risks down the line that to have this evil German Red Skull man as a villain would have been far easier. But even his origin is as simple as it can be, that, and it perfects the plot. He was a failed experiment by the same doctor that created Captain America. It's a very simple way to have a villain origin story, for him to kill off the guy, be the sort of one in denial that he is the super soldier, he is the strongest, and I like all that stuff. But it's so two-dimensional, and I don't mind that. I can let it pass because it's an origin story. I don't know if that's just me though.
It works for this film. It's really difficult because I can see both sides to it. He is very two-dimensional. First off, I'll say fair play to them for doing the makeup on him, though, because like with a character like Red Skull, it's exactly what you said. Like, all I knew was that he was a Nazi guy, literally with a red skull, which is like a ridiculous design. But it's a comic book thing, and if you're making a comic book thing, I've always said this: you've got to embrace the fact that that's what you're adapting, and just go with it. Like, that's what it is on the page. Just do it. You can modernize it if you want to. I praise the Thor films for that, for updating the comic book costumes, like the Loki helmet and everything. Just go with it. So I do prefer the makeup effects on Red Skull in this compared to when we get to Endgame and it's like CGI. It was really good CGI, and obviously the technology developed and it does look really good, but there's something about the practical makeup, and God knows how many hours Hugo Weaving would have had to have been in the seat for that stuff. Looks great. And I like the fact as well that we don't just get purely Hugo Weaving the entire film, and then like in the last fight scene, he would have taken the face off. We get like a decent chunk. I think it's about the halfway point where the Red Skull gets his full reveal. I think it's like an hour into the film. Hugo Weaving's a great actor. He can be a great dramatic actor. He's been in Cloud Atlas. Hacksaw Ridge is probably the most recent thing I've seen him in. And obviously, I don't even need to start talking about Lord of the Rings. I love him in those films as well. And he's good in The Matrix as well. The Matrix, he does get very hammy, though, in the sequels. And I guess we kind of see an element of that ham here as Red Skull. The thing is with Red Skull is that I love Hugo Weaving, and I think he was a great actor. I think he was a great choice for the role. But you don't really get much of a sense of a personality from him. And he's sort of like caught in this weird in between where he's a Nazi basically, so I'm fine with him being a two-dimensional villain. But also on the flip side, they build up Cap so well, who has so many layers and so many dimensions, and even the supporting cast, that I'm fine with them devoting the attention to the main protagonist and setting up the hero more so than the villain. I know it's a delicate balancing act, and a good film can do them both justice, but Red Skull's a tough villain to crack, I think. I think he's tough to bring into the story in that way because, yeah, he does share an origin story in that way where, the same doctor, gave him like a serum and it completely messed him up. But with Captain America, it was a success and they ironed out all the kinks. So maybe you could have had a beat where Red Skull wanted to get revenge on Stanley Tucci because, there's that there, but Stanley Tucci's out of the movie before the end of the first act. But other than that, they don't really have any kind of common ground. It's not like a Joker and Batman situation where they are intrinsically, psychologically very similar people. They couldn't be more different. You've got Captain America fighting for freedom, and you've got, Red Skull who wants to take over the world. So I think it's fine for this film. I would have liked a little bit more, maybe some more interplay between him and Captain America. You have that great scene. One of my favorite shots in the film is where the metal walkway divides and it pulls back to that wide shot as the factory's exploding and they're on two opposite sides. Love that. And I love their dialogue there. But other than that scene, you just get like the final fight where they just throw some really awfully written cliched dialogue back and forward at each other when they're having their final fight. So maybe more interplay between the two would have ironed that out. I think he works. I think for me, he's a villain that had so much potential to go on and get great with additional films or additional appearances. Maybe in Civil War may have been a good one. Maybe he was working with, I always forget his name, the guy who's the villain in Civil War. Yeah, maybe he's like working for him or like pulling the strings, always in the shadows, whatever. But no, we just get him in Infinity War, and that's a bit strange. Like he just ended up there, and now he's like a kind of guardian watching over the stone. It's weird. It works for the film, but I think he's a villain that could have had more potential if he'd have been given more screen time and build up throughout the entire MCU, maybe.
Yeah, I think what you say about personality as well, and what you said, George, I think that if you're Joe Johnston or you're Marcus McFeely, and obviously all you know is that the only person coming out of this film that is definitely going to be seen again is Captain America, then obviously your entire focus is just going to tunnel vision, isn't it? It's like they probably thought, well, we don't know if we're being hired for the next one, but what we do know is we've been told to build this character up and at the very least flesh out an extremely watchable origin story for Steve Rogers. Whereas, like, as we see with Red Skull, I don't know when that was put into the script. It could have been late on because obviously the Infinity Stones and the Tesseract, etc. He gets zapped away. They never know if they're going to be picking up a pen to write about him again. So I think that might be where the two-dimensionalness sort of airs from, and also the fact that you don't want to give a Nazi too much personality, and like you don't want to have people end up rooting for him the way some people like love Thanos. Do you know what I mean? So it is a fine line to walk down, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think sort of building off Red Skull, one of the other, I guess, major introductions to the MCU is who would obviously get a bigger role in Winter Soldier, which is Hydra, being introduced to the villainous organization. And I think, Chris, going back to what you said as well, that, there are times for them to come in across future films. And I mean, we'll get to Winter Soldier next week, but, when that twist happened in Winter Soldier, I remember being like, oh my word, this is game changing. That changed everything to me about the MCU off that moment. And it's kind of a shame. And I don't mind it because I love the way that Toby Jones was a computer. They'd computerized him and all that weird stuff. But it was the fact that that was Red Skull's, that was his people. And that sounds really weird. The whole ridiculous, it always reminds me, I always laugh when that first Force Awakens trailer came out with the sort of the saluting, I always thought of the Hail Hydra stuff. He's got his little champagne glass and the two hands. And I always found it funny because I didn't mind the Hail Hydra. And I know obviously again with Winter Soldier, the Hail Hydra became even more of, I guess, an iconic sort of quote in itself. I think more for the meme territory than anything else. But their setup is, I think there's teasers of them in the first Avengers film, and there's like Hydra technology and all that stuff. And it's a really cool way to bring in an organization because at this time we've still got S.H.I.E.L.D. And S.H.I.E.L.D. is very much the good guys in the suits. And, we get them, I guess, at the end of this film, and we get them in the Thor and the Iron Mans, and they've got their own little setup across the phase 1 and phase 2. And, having Hydra counter them was a really cool dynamic, but Hydra just doesn't have the leader. I mean, I guess ultimately their leader is Robert Redford, right? If you really think about it, but it's a very strange one because I thought so much could have happened with Hydra, but again, no Red Skull. It sort of it doesn't detract anything off Winter Soldier, but it does make you think, like, could you imagine? Again, does it come down to Marvel not wanting him in, or does it come down to maybe some of Hugo Weaving's antics? I don't know, but certainly Chris, going back to what he said as well, that with the tech when they brought him back, I don't think that tech was ready even in 2014 to have fully done CGI Red Skull, and it would have been too random for him to crop up on Earth in the 2010s. I love the fact that he's away in Infinity War, that, you know, he did go looking for the stones and he's stuck there forever. Maybe there'll be a way back from him in the future, because if the stones have been relieved, then surely his duties, I don't know. But it's a very interesting situation, but I think the Hydra stuff definitely worth mentioning.
Yeah, and you know, we talk about like dimensions to the villains. I guess Zola, in a way, has a few dimensions. He is that Weasley sidekick character, but there's moments where you could say it's the cliche bad thing to do and a bad guy thing to do, where the villain kills his own troops because he's angry or because they get in the way or something. And there's a moment with that with Red Skull, but you can see the look on Zola's face that he's looking for a way out. Like he's working for this cause, but he's kind of like a Hans Lander character, Christoph Waltz's character from Inglourious Bastards, that when, you know, favor changes against them and the status quo changes and the opposite side's winning, he's trying to curry favor with them in order to just to survive. He's like a cockroach, you can't kill him. And I get the impression that Zola's quite like that as well. There's the interrogation scene where Tommy Lee Jones as well. We'll talk about the rest of the supporting cast, but my God, like Tommy Lee Jones actually trying in a role. That's nice to see. I don't like to see Tommy Lee Jones sleepwalking through a film as he has been in recent films. He's really good in this. But as for Hydra in this film, I think I always favor the Hydra that do infiltrate places. You've got Richard Armitage in like the action scene that follows that scene. Again, Richard Armitage, all this cast, you know, Natalie Dormer, there's so many cast members in this, I completely forgot were in this film. The ones where, you know, you'll think the situation's fine, and then it turns out there's like Hydra have infiltrated there and they've got like a bunch of men in that room who you completely don't expect. And I prefer that Hydra. The rest of them in this film, the soldiers, you know, they're all kind of awkwardly wearing their gimp masks and looking absolutely ridiculous. And they're basically this film stormtroopers. They are literally there just to be lined up for the meat grinder and to have someone for Captain America to punch in the face or shoot at or explode. And it's fine. It's what you come to expect from a film like this. If you've got Nazis, you need like your jackbooted goons who they fight through, and it's fine. But I always do prefer the more methodical and in the shadows organization that Hydra is, rather than the foot soldiers from this film.
Yeah, I think what you say about Hydra as well, like I think it's a testament to the way they built that as well. Because also we talk about Red Skull maybe being two-dimensional, and obviously as far as this film's concerned, we're sort of like, oh, he was Hydra, and then when you go back and watch it now with the scope of the entire saga, it's like, oh, you can see the moments where Zola is like, oh, maybe I want out, or maybe like I want out of Red Skull's way, to be honest, because I mean he was only ever going to be collateral damage to Red Skull in the end, you'd imagine. So to be able to like then build on that in Winter Soldier and show that in fact Zola wasn't really working for the Red Skull. He'd been warped by Hydra all along to try and like eventually infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D. So I think from that point of view, the villain of the organization of Hydra sort of worked well and lived on throughout.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I think as well, I don't know if anyone's got anything to add on Hydra or Red Skull, but I think we should talk about the supporting characters because we've got two. I don't want to say legacy characters. That's a horrible word. That's like a Star Wars term. But let's talk Peggy, because this was the first thing I'd ever seen her in. And it was just okay. There's gonna be a sad scene, and he's gonna wake up the Avengers, right? You can't really develop them, and it's that cliche origin, the girl he's in love with. And even when I was younger, even when I didn't really care for the romance in the Hulk, I'm not a big fan of the Gwyneth Paltrow stuff, and the Thor and Natalie Portman stuff I don't think was great. This was the genuine relationship. On the first viewing, I was sold. What a couple, all leading to that tragic ending. And I'm assuming that it's probably, I don't say it's easier for the writers, I don't know, put themselves in their shoes, but when they know that Cap's going to have to get frozen and come back 70 years later, they go as sort of Green Goblin would say, you're going for the heart. Let's write in this tragic romance plot, because this is the best relationship in the MCU. and it's the most tragic relationship, and maybe that's why they're hand in hand. But I think the reason why isn't just that they had a good relationship, but the performance, Hayley Atwell being in this film as a constant, that she's so likable as a character, she stands by herself, that she's not roped into this horrible, you must be the Captain America fangirl, because then she would be a boring waste of space. She is an agent. She is someone that's recruited by the government to help with this stuff. And I think Hayley Atwell stands by herself, but they build this natural relationship that ultimately flows across the release of films, resulting in, I know we kind of said earlier, the sort of final shot, let's ignore Far From Home for a minute, the final shot of the Infinity Saga was Cap's dance with Hayley Atwell. And I think time has also developed this, even though it was amazing 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I didn't have tears in my eyes at the end of Captain America 1. It was sad. Watching this for the first time post-Endgame, this was devastating because it was a happy ending and he just didn't know it. And it's getting me going already, so I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure it won't happen to me as well. Yeah, so when I was watching this today, because I don't usually cry at the Marvel films, I'll go, oh, that's a sad scene, or oh, that's genuinely well done. And I remember not really caring about the film in general when I first saw it. When I watched it again on DVD, I did get more invested into it as a self-contained film. But yeah, complete different context after you've seen Endgame. And this got me today. This got me there. This is like the first Marvel film I've shed manly tears at, and I am not embarrassed to admit that. Captain America was the film that did that for me. And I mentioned this on the Thor review where we talked about the relationship in that it just felt like it was crowbarred in. The film didn't really need a romance angle or a love story to it. There were more engaging things going on with, you know, Thor becoming king and, you know, Loki and everything going on in Asgard. And it's just like, oh, it's a blockbuster. Let's just throw a love story in there. But this one feels like it has a place and it speaks to him as a character. And, you know, he is the sort of like wimpy guy who doesn't even know how to talk to a woman, and then he goes through this thing. But what I love as well is when he becomes the superhero and he's completely jacked and just ripped out of his mind, he still can't talk to women, and he's still the awkward person he was. It's just the aesthetic that's changed. And I am going to compare this again to the film that I compared Thor to, in that this is similarity to Superman, in that I think this one works. You've got the great back and forth. You've got the fantastic banter there. There's the physical attraction, but you believe that it's believable love story. And that's what shines through. And I think the actors just make that happen. You've got Hayley Atwell, who just plays it brilliantly. There's the moment I love, it's where he first gets transformed, and it's just like the little subtleties in performance. She like goes to like touch his pecs and then kind of recoils. It's just little moments like that, just really charming moments. There's a moment in the film where Cap, oh God, what's her name? Natalie Dormer kisses Captain America. And there's a moment where I couldn't remember it. I thought, oh, are they going to go with this whole, no, it's not what it looks like. And then she's angry at him for like a whole chunk. But they don't dwell on that. And I'm really glad they don't, because I hate when films go down that route. It's really cliched and tried and tested. But yeah, and after you see Endgame, like, my God, the ending to this just killed me. And I don't know if it was sort of like emotional tears as being sad at the moment. I think it was that one day, Cap, it's all going to come good for you. It's all going to work out. You're going to have that dance. You're going to make that date, and you're going to live your best life with Peggy. So I think I was getting more emotional from that, knowing that eventually it will lead to a happy ending. But I love how that ending's edited, and the music as well. We'll talk about the music as a separate thing, but where he's like, talk to me, as he's like aiming the plane down and they're just having a conversation. It's beautiful. It's getting me going now. It's like a relay race. Let's pass it on.
I mean, there was nothing manly about my tears after Endgame. I 10 minutes down that cinema. But it's a testament to Hayley Atwell, I think, as a whole, just because there's a reason that in every single film that Cap's involved in, it's littered with mentions of her. It's littered with everything that happened in there, albeit brief past together. That's why that scene, like this film's story beats between the two of them and their on-screen chemistry, is why that scene in Winter Soldier, when she's old, hits so hard. And I think that I still think that's one of the best between two actors. Is probably one of the best acted scenes in the MCU in Winter Soldier, and that stems from their on-screen chemistry in this film. And even again, I said earlier, I'd love to have seen more of Peggy. I'd love to have seen more of that character and them two as a whole. I don't think Chris Evans should return to the MCU. I think everything was so perfectly placed that the end is great, But if someone was like, "Oh, we're going to see a 6-episode limited series of him putting the stones back with Peggy," I'd be like, "Well, fine. I'm sure I can get over that." Like, yeah. But yeah, but as we said before, the supporting characters in this film as a whole are great. Again, like you said earlier, Tommy Lee Jones actually looks like he's having fun, which is a rare thing for him on screen, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, Tommy Lee Jones. Before we get to Bucky, I think we should do Tommy Lee Jones, Stanley Tucci really quickly, and the Howling Commandos, because the Howling Commandos are very big to the Captain America fans. That's his squad. That's his, I don't want to say hit team, but what amazed me is that someone that loved Band of Brothers. I always forget the actor's name. He pops up in everything. He plays the main one, the blonde head guy. Looks like Gunther from Friends. Every time he's in it, I like the fact that Captain America has his own squad, that even though they're not important to the grand scheme of things, that's still his guys. And I know, again, jumping forward to the Winter Soldier, but when he's walking around the museum, and Bucky as well, and it's all this history stuff, it is that sort of nostalgic, I remember this, and it's, again, that character that, you know, when you get to the end of his story arc, it's that he was never really living in the present. He was the 1940s, and that's why he had to go back to that time period. And I think everyone's got the perfect thing, but yeah, the Tommy Jones, I loved him in this. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, he's Two-Face, he's over the top, he's this, but in this one, it's maybe because he's the miserable general, it kind of makes more sense, but his delivery is great, his comedy is great, and I think he seems to, I don't want to say have chemistry with the actors, but I feel like I feel that those he was working with, he either probably detested them enough to take it into his performance, or he genuinely really enjoyed being in it, because when you look at Marvel, you look at the kind of actors they've pissed off over the years, you would assume he'd be right at the top of them, but he's probably one of the fortunate ones that didn't have to sign his life away. It was a one and done. And I think there was a place in there for him. I think when he's talking with Stanley Tucci, they're both great, the pair of them. Everyone that interacts with Cap in this film, I think, has been nailed casting-wise.
Yeah, and when I see Tommy Lee Jones in this film, I often wonder if he was actually told that he was in a Marvel comic book film, Captain America, if they just said, you're going to be playing this like World War II general, like go for it. But he has played Two-Face, so I guess they have broke. I don't know if that's ruined comic book films for him, is what I'm saying, after playing Two-Face in Batman Forever. He's fantastic. He reminds me of his performance that he had in The Fugitive. I don't know if you've seen that, the Harrison Ford film, where he's kind of barking orders at people. He's like, I want to search every in-house, out-house, doghouse, and it's, you know, Tommy Lee Jones doing what he does best and not sleepwalking through the film. So it's always good to see that. And Stanley Tucci, I mean, that guy, can that guy do a bad film? I'm trying to think of a bad film that he's in. Even if he's in it, he's usually great in whatever he's in. Oh God, I can remember
Transformers
film. Yes,
and he's great in it.
Oh, he is great in it, but it's a terrible film. I just remember that. Yeah. But no, Tucci, and it's just when his character dies, I was like, oh no, we have another sad death of the nice scientist man, like in the first Iron Man film, where you don't, like, what's his name? Yusuf? No, Jensen.
Oh, no, is it Jensen?
And it's just like, oh, I don't want to see him die. It's really sad. And then he says, like, remember, and he like taps him on the chest. It's just, oh, Stanley Tucci. Yeah, no, the supporting cast is fantastic. I mean, it's just as good. Usually in some of these films, you have like the lead who completely overshadows everyone else because your focus is on them. But it just goes to show that although the focus of the story is on Captain America, you can't sort of let the supporting cast down there just as strong, and they help strengthen the foundations of the whole film in general. And that's exactly the case with this film.
Yeah, I think, and obviously what you're saying, George, about, I think it's Neil McDonough, the blonde guy, I think he's called, something like that.
That's the one, yeah.
Him and obviously with Bucky as well, that we'll get onto. Like I enjoyed the heist scene, the scene on the train. I do enjoy that. I think it's good. You almost wish you'd seen a little bit more of that. I think Neil McDonough gets more to do than the rest of them do. I can't remember the actors' names of some of the others there. I think one of them was in like Goal 3 or something like that. Like, that's just popped into my head randomly. But you'd have maybe liked seeing a little bit more of that. But obviously, again, what we were saying earlier about the scope of the film purely having to be, this is Cap's origin story. All we know is Cap's going to move on from this film. So let's hone in on him as much as we can. But it still makes that scene on the train hit quite hard. And I knew nothing about comic book films back then at all. So I had no idea that Bucky goes on to be the Winter Soldier. So when he falls off that train, I was like, oh, wow, I genuinely wasn't expecting that when I was 10 years old, or however. It was pretty sad.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good starting point with Bucky, because what struck me is, at the time, I knew bits of the Winter Soldier. I knew that he had a friend that turned into a villain down the line, and my worry with not really back then because I didn't really expect it, but you'd assume that okay, none of these guys can be in the future. That's his team. We've got an evil German man. Let's just kill off his entire team for this big emotion ending, and everyone he knows has died, and he's got to come to the future. And I like the fact that they don't kill them all off, and the Bucky stuff. You know, again, looking back, I couldn't have told you that back then there'd be he'd not just be in the sequels, but he'd be in other Marvel films. He'd get his own TV series, and he'd be doing all this. And when I started reading comics, one of the first ones I did go to was The Winter Soldier. That's one of my close friends who got me to watch for ages. Someone that told me that that guy will be back, so I didn't get upset because I knew within a minute that he's going to be coming back in a future film. And again, going back to Kevin Feige, I remember, sorry, not how I think, but when you sort of hit that age where you start realizing that all these people are on long contracts, I remember them saying that Sebastian Stan had signed like a 7-picture deal and how that he would always be destined to become Captain America. And obviously here we are 2021 and he's not kind of hit that stride yet. However, you can see why they gave him that contract, why they wanted him to stick around, because Kevin Feige doesn't play games. He plans and he plans, and they would have known from the moment they did this film, okay, are there any story beats we want to do in the future? Winter Soldier we want to do, and maybe Red Skull, which is why they don't have definitive deaths, why they don't have those. If they were going to kill Red Skull, they would have done it. I think you'd have seen it happen. But again, they averted that question. And I think Sebastian Stan, I'm not going to sit here and say he's my favorite thing in this. It's nice seeing him with with Cap when they're younger, pre-modern day. I did have a sadistic laugh when Howard Stark was on stage and Bucky's in the crowd. I was like, he's going to kill you in a few years. None of us had that coming either. So that was a really weird thing. But they had great chemistry together. And what hit me again, there's a line, I can't remember what point. I just call it the stupid line from Endgame when he says, you know, you're taking all the stupid with you. And I didn't realize that had been in this first film. And that hit me. I was like, oh my God, they knew it all along. So I thought Sebastian Stan's great as an introduction, but I think he set the stone to him to eventually get a bit more of the limelight as time's gone by. And I'm really excited to see him in Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, he comes into his own more, I would say, with Winter Soldier, definitely. Now, it's been years since I saw that film. I think I only saw it the once, actually, in the cinema, so my memory's a little hazy on it. But yeah, I mean, he obviously gets more to do at that point. But I still think he serves the story in this one, and I do like his friendship, his apparent friendship. You can see it. It's evident on screen. I like how at the beginning you have the payoff to that nice payoff where he's getting all the girls, you know, when he's going out with his best mate Cap at the beginning. Steve's the wimpy one, and then you get that nice role reversal later on where Peggy approaches Captain America and he's like, it's like I'm invisible, like she doesn't want to know me. So I like those moments. All the beats are there. There's the moment in the factory where it's all coming down and he says, like, I'm not leaving without you. They established the friendship really well, I think, in this first film, which obviously then takes you into the drama of all the next ones. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can say about Bucky. I think that's pretty much it. It is good. Like, I will say the Howling Commandos, though, just going back to them just really quickly. I don't know if there are any deleted scenes from this film. I haven't checked. I assume there's usually deleted scenes in all of these Marvel films in some way, shape, or form. I don't felt like they got given enough. I don't think they got sort of like their personalities never really formed to me. I never really connected with them as much. And I don't know if it's just because they're in this one movie and then that's it. But I think the film was dealing with so many characters and so many things that it's nice that they're there and that they're referenced and that they get something, you know, to be involved in, but it's only like a scene or like a handful of scenes. I never really got to know their personalities all that much. But I mean, the focus should be on Bucky, you know, to set him up for all the future films. And that's exactly what the film does. I think it picks and chooses its attention and where it's going to distribute that very effectively in this film.
Yeah, I think from what you're just saying about Bucky sort of throughout the films as well, I think it's nice to see, especially in this one at the start, like he is almost everything that Steve wants to be at the start. He's a handsome guy that's going to war, that's getting all the ladies, but Steve obviously wants to be that. And then we find out that eventually Steve is so much more than that. And there's no rivalry between the two of them. Anything is jokey, obviously, as we see from the start of this all the way through to the end of Endgame. So, I mean, it's just a really nice friendship, isn't it, really?
Definitely. I think one other thing, 'cause I know we've got a couple of other things to cover. I'm not going to talk about a character, but I think we have to talk about a MacGuffin. Probably with the most character development a MacGuffin's ever had, which is the Tesseract. We see it for the very first time in this film. Again, going back to 2011, not that I knew that the Infinity Saga was a thing. I couldn't have told you much about the Infinity Gauntlet back then. I'm not going to lie, I didn't know who Thanos was back then. You read it eventually, but when you go back to this, like, oh my god, the Tesseract, it pops up in the Avengers, it pops up down the line, it becomes Loki's thing. But it's amazing in this film seeing how something so sort of, again, plot device, the MacGuffin, has this ridiculous development from Filch opening it in the casket to Red Skull wanting it from the get-go to weaponizing it and all that stuff. I thought it was really cool to see it again. I don't know if that's me being a bit of a weirdo and liking stones too much, but it has had that moment. And I think when you go to Infinity War, when Loki hands it over and Thanos just shatters it, throws it in the glove, it does have that effect that we've seen this for years and he's finally got his hands on it. So it's those kind of things I really like. And even with the Tesseract, not to delve on it too much, but they even have a reference to Odin in the very first scene. And it's, again, that really this universe is coming together. And I love the fact that, sort of going back to the Nazi thing, that, we know that Hitler liked all the artifacts and that weird stuff. And his kind of unofficial number 2 is also the weirdo that also likes the artifacts. But this guy's not got his sights set on Earth. He's got his sights set on other things. And I think down the line, that's come into play more. And again, who would have known back then, even from Howard Stark digging it out right at the end of the film, knowing that we're going to see it in the Avengers. It had already been in a cameo, I guess, in the Thor credit scene. So I thought that was definitely worth mentioning for its own thing.
Yeah, is it weird to say, like, a sense of character development for an Infinity Stone? We do definitely get it with a Tesseract. Yeah, it's probably the one that we have the most attachment to, because I think it probably crops up the most, more than any of the other stones. And yeah, it is nice when it gets that payoff eventually. I mean, it's even obviously used in the main First Avengers film too. Like, we can't escape this bloody Tesseract. It's in everything in, like, phase 1 into phase 2 and even phase 3. So yeah, no, I really enjoy all that stuff. And I actually didn't remember that there were as many callbacks to Thor and Norse mythology in the beginning. So that was a complete new thing. It was like, whoa, Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and Odin's, Odin's treasure collection, or whatever they say. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. This is awesome. I must have known it back then when I first saw it, because obviously I went to see Thor. I would have known about that stuff going to see this, but you forget things, especially after all these years, because it's not a film that I've gone back to all that many times. So I loved all the references in there. And usually I say it's a fine line with references with films. You can either cram too many of them in. I always say Iron Man 2, or, like, not to stick with just Marvel, but Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, where it's, let's just throw everything into this movie. Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's countless of examples out there of films that do that. So you could say, like, oh, Howard Stark, well, of course, you're just crowbarring that Iron Man reference in there, but it makes sense because he would have been around at this time. It sets up future things. And the actor as well, I forgot what his name is. It Dominic something?
Dominic Cooper.
Dominic Cooper, brilliant in this. Absolutely brilliant. Definitely emulating the style that Robert Downey Jr. played to it, but it's nice to see Howard Stark in his younger days, where he is that, exactly the same qualities that his son will have in X amount of years' time. So, yeah, the references didn't get too out of hand in this one, I don't think, to me. Everything felt in keeping. Like, yeah, you could say that, oh, of course, you mentioned in Odin and everything, but it all feels in keeping into the story and sort of formulating that strong foundation for the MCU, where everything is starting to connect now. And I think at this point as well, when you're at your final standalone film before you get to your big team up film, it's acceptable to have more of those references in there. So yeah, I loved all that stuff in this.
Yeah, I think what helps that as well is the sort of clear, say, vision that Joe Johnston had to sort of use those Raiders of the Lost Ark, like, beats that he uses throughout, and I think that helps with the quote unquote character development of the Tesseract and what we've been saying. And it sort of, like, puts maybe the Infinity Stone, well, we don't know it's Infinity Stone, but puts the Tesseract as a MacGuffin through a lens that people already know. Because I mean, back then I'd seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I had no idea anything about Infinity Stones or anything. So maybe that sort of helped people back then to sort of keep with the story beat by beat, and also maybe think that I assume we're going to see this again down the line.
Can we say that Indiana Jones is in continuity with the MCU films now? Maybe that's going to be what he's searching for in Indiana Jones 5. It's going to be the lost Infinity Stone that Thanos could never find. Who knows?
How much money would they have to pay Harrison Ford? I think he would turn down everything.
Harrison Ford would just click his fingers and be like, "Can you stop asking me about Han Solo and Indiana Jones now, and there's Indiana Jones 5. I'd pay good money for him to wear an Infinity Gauntlet. That'll be the day. We've seen him dressed up as a hot dog on TV. Why not wearing the
aliens in the franchise at this point? Like, where do you go after that? You go interconnected movie universes, right? Infinity Stones. Let's do it.
Definitely. Side point, I know that Kevin Feige had to release a statement last week saying that the MCU will not be connected to his Star Wars produced film. Doesn't ever need to make that a news point. It's just them awful clickbait companies keep going. So we'll leave that in the past. Yeah, I mean, this has been pretty insane so far because we haven't even got to a couple of the last bits. But let's talk something that we haven't really spoke about in great depth in the series so far. And we might not have much, but the soundtrack's definitely worth a mention because not just the score itself, not just Cap's themes, but this is Alan Silvestri's first MCU film, and we do get him following up with the Avengers, and then we get the return of him in Endgame and Infinity War. And I completely forgot about that rewatching that. You know, the Marvel soundtracks certainly in the early stages weren't as great. Thor one's really good to go back to, but I didn't realize the Cap theme in this. Cap's theme completely threw me off guard, and I thought it was pretty great. I don't know if that's me being a bit extreme.
No, Silvestri's score for this film is just absolutely incredible. Can we say that Silvestri is sort of like the unofficial sound of the MCU? I know that that's like a discussion that, you know, they were just constantly different composers left, right, and center. But, you know, Cap's theme, probably say Black Panther's theme, and then the main Avengers theme are sort of like the main ones that stay with you. And there were moments in this, listening to the soundtrack again after watching those final two Avengers films. Oh, no, the Spider-Man. The final two Avengers films. Where, yeah, it just makes those moments more impactful, more emotional, because you do know where those themes are going to lead, the motifs that are linked with the certain characters. I've always loved Silvestri. He definitely does have quite a identifiable sound. If you listen to the Back to the Future soundtrack and then you listen to any other soundtracks that he's done, you can always pick like certain cues out. But yeah, it's an incredible soundtrack. I don't know who composed we'll talk about favorite moments and favorite scenes. There's a musical montage in this film. I don't know if he composed that or if that was a separate composer. But if he did compose that, I should have checked that before this review. But yeah, it's just incredible. It's a brilliant soundtrack. I don't know if I like it as much as the Thor soundtrack. I think I'd probably listen to the Thor soundtrack more in isolation than I would this one. But I'd say this one definitely does have the strengths of the soundtrack purely because they were themes that did continue to get used and recurred as the MCU went on.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to that Captain America song. I'd probably listen to it again. I mean, it's quite catchy, isn't it? And it works for the story as well. Obviously, he's being rolled around the country as this human piece of propaganda to drum up support for drum up sort of finance for war as well, isn't it, really? Mm-hmm. And as he says, he's knocked out Hitler over 500 times or something, so it does work well, I think.
Yeah, I think, Chris, I want to say it's called the Star Spangled Brigade or something.
I think it is.
I just found out who wrote the music for that, and I've lost my mind. It's Alan Menken, like my favorite Disney composer. Like the sound of Disney, he made that. Like, that makes sense. Catchy, awesome tune. Okay, that's awesome.
That's I didn't realize that. That's I was jumped out then. Sorry, I'm back. I don't know if anyone else got cut off there. No, the song's great. The montage is great, and also it's that I know we get comments down the line in the later Avenger films and the whole, you know, is it the monkey on the string thing in Avengers, and you get all that stuff. But I think that set up Cap so great that when you get to I guess kind of moving on to moments and stuff as well, when you get that moment of him having enough, of him walking away, him going to the base to break out the soldiers that have gone missing, I think that's earned, and I don't think that scene works anywhere near as well if you don't have the propaganda montage before. And kind of what you said earlier, Chris, a really modern take, even though it's a propaganda war piece, is that whole thing, the fact he's wearing the original Captain America costume, and it's sort of fabricated. Again, it's not really a WandaVision spoiler, but we kind of laugh in WandaVision, they bring in the classic costumes, and it's sort of like costume dress up, and it works great. And I think all of that montage scene builds up to the character he becomes, that he needs to go through that to eventually become the sort of super soldier we know.
Yeah, I think it's honestly one of the strongest scenes in the entire MCU, just because you can read so much into it. You could probably write a dissertation on all the information you get from this one musical montage and what it does with Cap as a character. and his stance and his outlook on things. And the montage itself does have like a beginning, middle, and end. Like you can see Cap changes throughout this montage, and that should be the case of any good montage, in that it actually furthers the story and the state of the characters. It's not just in there for filler or fan service. It works on so many levels, because you've got the level where it is sort of like poking fun and addressing at how Captain America in our time. They even show the actual comic books in this, which I thought was a great nod. They show that the impact that it had, the propaganda piece that actually translated into the Marvel comics at the time that was read by everyone, and how, in a way, Captain America is sort of like a beacon of hope for people in that way. But as the more of these shows that he does, and, you know, Tommy Lee Jones kind of gives him a dressing down with that as well, saying just, oh, you know, I can't remember exactly what he says, but he basically says, you're a chorus girl, I think he says. But you can see it getting to Cap as the more he does these shows, he's just been sort of like traveling around all across the country doing these rallies and everything, these, you know, song and dance numbers, but he's not getting stuck in. He's not living up to his true potential. This is not what he signed up for. He went through this literal physical transformation to get stuck into the war. And what's he doing? He's not seeing any action. He's just fronted as this cartoon character, basically. The costume as well is great. I love how they integrated the original look of the character. Very, very creative way. But it just shows Cap and like his determination to do right. And how beautifully at the end of that montage you have all this, like, you know, brass and fanfare and pomp and circumstance, and then the very final scene of that is where he's actually talking and he's trying to do the same show to a bunch of veterans who have been out there for years doing this and have seen the horrors of war, and they're having absolutely none of it, and they don't believe in any of that propaganda. And I think that's really the turning point for him. And then it's beautifully bookended where he does come back with all of the guys, and he has finally now earned the respect of the troops, of his fellow soldiers. And yeah, that whole part is just easily my favorite scene. There are beautiful, like, other scenes we mentioned, like the final scene and the emotional beats with Peggy. All of those are great. But if I'm going to isolate one of my favorite moments, which I think says the most about the character, it would be that montage, the Star Spangled Man with a Plan.
Yeah, and I think as we've spoken about moments in this film that sort of translate throughout the entire saga as well, I wonder if we'll look back on this montage differently after you've seen something like The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where the trailer makes it look like they may be trying to turn Captain America back into that symbol of patriotism again, by possibly not giving the shield to Sam. I mean, that's to be spoken about at a later date. But yeah, and I think that will only add, and everything that has happened would only add to the legacy of this film and sort of help it, you know, give it its due as a vital piece for the puzzle of the saga, I think, because I do think it does get a slightly bad rap.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I want to speak about before I sort of go into the last bit, we always talk about the credit scene and the Stanley cameo. Let's go to the Stanley cameo first, because it's not an Iron Man 2 glance in the corridor. I'm going to keep bringing that up. There's such a low standard because of that now. Again, it's that quip. You always know he's going to appear, and he will, and he'll make a joke, and he'll go. And it's that great scene where the fake cap, well, the guy runs out on stage and goes, I thought he'd be taller. Again, it's nothing major, but it's that ticking off that it works for the film. And I know the theories are going to go across the years that was Stanley the Watcher the entire time. James Gunn nailed that by putting him in the credit scene and that kind of thing. But it's another nice little cameo, and I like it where, you know, it could be an extra, or it doesn't need to be anyone having dialogue, but they know, if you're a writer, that where can I put the Stanley cameo? Like, what do I want to do? And it must have been so much fun for them to write that, even up until Endgame. And I think that's maybe one of his best ones. But it's just like a one-line thing, but it's like a really nice, heartwarming thing. They always are. I don't know. I'm probably going to say every video now, but the Stanley cameos are like one of the most welcome, wholesome things in the whole of Marvel, not just the MCU.
Yeah, and I think my favorite ones are always the situational quips, like Thor's one that we mentioned, where he's in the pickup truck trying to drag Mjolnir out, and he's like, did I get it or whatever? I can't remember what he shouts when he looks out the window. It's really, really quick, and those are always my favorite ones. Similar to this one too. Some of them where they know this is the time for the Stanley cameo, and they really drag it out and they really make it pronounced. I think Amazing Spider-Man 1's a good example of that, where he's listening to the record and there's this whole action scene, and they dwell on it for so long, and it's like, that's not what it should be. It's the quick little quips and the little moments like this one that are always my favorite.
Yeah, the moments that don't jar or stop the story, that sort of help continue it. I think my favorite one is always the Civil War one. The Tony Stank one, I think, is the best by a mile. That gets me every time.
There's so many with him. I don't think, especially if the Captain America was, the Tony Stank's a classic. I remember, and again, it's going back to that first-time experience that we all know where they are now. But when you're in that cinema with the crowd, it's everyone kind of like, you don't get a whisper, but it's like the Stanley cameo, and like everyone always reacts to it, and it's always lovely, the stuff like that. And as well as the Stanley cameo, we're moving on to the credit scene. The credit trailer. I mean, we get a clip from Avengers, and then we get the first official Scissor for the Avengers. Don't know if you guys stayed around for it back in its original release, but I remember making my friends stay behind. I'd heard on the internet that there was going to be a credit scene, there was going to be an Avengers trailer, and at the time, we know this is coming. We're getting the James Bond again. Captain America will return in the Avengers, and I remember being hyped for this. Seeing him in the future, we'll get into one of my favorite scenes in a minute, actually, but seeing him in the future, punching the bag, that gasp, but it was the trying to save it. And then I want to say it feels like the bloody 90s, the weird music they're playing in the background of the Avengers. But again, taking you back to 2012, having these guys teaming up wasn't a thing. So when you sit there in August 2011, oh my God, they're going to all be in the same film next year. This is amazing. Look, Thor is talking to Iron Man. Now no one cares because we're so accustomed to it. And sort of as a mindset, I think that was the perfect way to ace Phase 1. Not Phase 1, sorry. Just stick a trailer in for the actual Phase 1 finale. And always loved it. I remember downloading it online illegally. You'll remember the old YouTube days of like 360p, people editing camera quality credit scenes. I used to love that kind of stuff. And the Avengers Scissor reel had me.
Yeah, I think it's a weird thing now, all these years on, like, looking at this as a credit scene, because back in the time, yeah, like, it's like coming next year or like the summer of 2012, the Avengers, we knew it was leading to it anyway, but just seeing a trailer where you've got Robert Downey Jr. there, you've got Thor there, and you've got all these characters in the same room. They don't show many action scenes. It's mostly probably just the stuff that they, because they hadn't maybe finished all the effects on everything yet. It was just sort of like the more bog standard conversation scenes. I think it worked back then. However, it was very weird watching it today and getting to that, because I knew it was the trailer. I remembered it was a trailer, but I thought I'll watch it anyway. It doesn't work all these years on, does it? It doesn't really like stay the test of time, purely because we're X amount of Avengers films into it now, 20 plus films, and charging into Phase 4. It's weird to go back and see that. So maybe they could have just used the punching bag scene. It's like, Cap, there's another mission coming up, and then cut to black, and that's your post-credit scene. So it's still, I know it's a scene taken directly from the Avengers film, but it's pushing you towards, the next film. It's not just like, here's a 20 or 30 second trailer or something for in X amount of years time, where you look back, it's like, oh yeah, well, we've been that small potatoes now. We've been there, done that. It doesn't really hold up. But at the time when this came out in 2011, then yeah, absolutely, it brought the theater down. But they could have also just released that as a teaser trailer later that year or into the next year anyway.
Yeah, I think that from their point of view, like obviously now they wouldn't think like a name reveal like we've seen today with the new Spider-Man. That brings the house down now. Like that's unnecessary now, but back then to sort of promote something that, again, like I was not a massive fan of that sort of superhero stuff back then. So like for someone like me, I had no idea, literally no idea that the Avengers are coming out. So it was a little bit of a shock for me to see it and think, oh, that is pretty cool. But I think they lean on, before that, obviously with the punching bag scene, I think they just lean on what they always lean on in the Phase 1 credit scenes. It's just that the gravitas that Sam Jackson brings when he walks into a room, you just know shit's about to go down. So it helps.
No, definitely. Sam Jackson, actually, good thing. We're talking about our favourite scenes. I'm going to throw a spanner in the works. I love the whole film, so it's quite hard to this, but I always loved that final scene. And I don't know what it was about it. I'm obviously not American, I'm not patriotic to that sense, but seeing Cap wake up, knowing they're in that weird studio, knowing there's something not right. I remember watching that for the first time, and it's when he says, where am I? I was at that game all those years ago. And I think this is actually Sylvester's score to credit to him. They build up to it so well. And it's when he's running around the building, he's like a fish out of water. He doesn't know what's going on. He runs into the street. He's in Times Square. And Sam Jackson appearing, as we literally just said, when Sam Jackson rocks up in the early Marvel films, you know something's happening. And I remember seeing that scene. Obviously, the credit scene happens, you know, that's the thing. But that moment to me was like, oh my God, like they did it. Here we are in 2011. We've just had all these solo films. We've now got Captain America in modern day. The Avengers is about to be a thing. And I remember absolutely loving that. And again, rewatching it as the years have gone by, it's still one of my favorite scenes from the entire film. I love pretty much everything in this film. I don't think there's a terrible scene at all. There's so many great scenes of how the death of I don't even know his name, Stanley Tucci, basically playing German scientist. Amazing scene, the heart stuff, all that great stuff. But to me, one of my favorite moments has always been that final scene, and that's a credit to the entire film. It deserved an ending. To have that build-up. That build-up doesn't work if the film hasn't executed 1940s perfectly.
Do you think that would have worked as a post-credit scene? I think
No.
because back then not everyone would have been seeing it, so I think that would have been really confusing for people maybe coming to Avengers who hadn't seen it. But yeah, and what a bittersweet ending it is as well. That final line, "I had a date." Credits,
Yeah.
and it's like victorious music, and it's just like happy again, right? It's like, no, I'm still really sad at that final line, but you know, fair play to the writers and for the director too, because they usually end it on like superhero hype, don't they, with these superhero films, whether it's, you know, Thor or whatever. I guess Thor kind of had a bittersweet ending as well. Or like Iron Man, it's like I am Iron Man, it's like yes, and then like Black Sabbath in the credits, or Incredible Hulk, like the green eyes. This one's just like, oof, you know, you just that gut punch of that final line and then into your credits, that's the end of the movie. But fair play to them, because that's, you know, it's just staying true to the character and his mental state at that point after everything he's gone through.
Yeah, I absolutely love that scene. I think especially when he's trying to get out, and you can see the panic in every single SHIELD agent's face when he's trying to run through that corridor, and then all the cars pull up, and obviously I can't remember what Sam Jackson says. He say like "Stand down, soldier" or something. He's like, "You've been asleep a long time," and then just the look of almost sort of like, it's more pure shock, isn't it? I suppose on Cap's face, or realization of. He's a smart guy. He knows exactly what's happened now. And his first instant thought is Peggy. And then that sort of brings the hammer down on the entire thing.
Well, there's quite a nice parallel as well, because they go to that in like the World War II stuff. They go to like the world of tomorrow, don't they? Like the fair of like all these, and then he literally gets there at the end of the film. So that's quite nicely paid off as well. There was one moment in that scene where they go to that fair where you can see like a red superhero costume in like a glass case, and I was like looking at it, I was like, did that lead to anything? Is that a character? Is that a reference to a character? And I couldn't place it. Maybe it was just there as like a man of tomorrow, we're all going to look like this, and it's precursor to Captain America. I'm not sure.
I love that in that scene as a little mini reference. I love this. It's the fact it's the Stark Expo, and it's an Iron Man 2. It's like, aha, there's the giant globe again. There's Howard Stark, and it's that again, slowly knitting that universe together, which now we're so used to, but back then that was still a pretty radical thing a year after Iron Man 2 getting. But yeah, that was sort of my favorite scene. I don't know what your guys is, if you've got any other scenes you want to speak about, or if you have a clear favorite, because there's just so much consistency of the film.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The certain shots that really stood out to me in this one again, just the superhero hype mode I talk about, the bit where he throws the grenades into the tank and jumps off the tank in slow motion as it explodes behind him. Awesome, looks incredible. What else? The bit where it was the trailer shot where he throws the shield directly into the camera. Just bits like that, really, that just sort of like imagery that stuck with me. The doors flying open and like gunning everyone down, which I think all these were in the trailer, and you can see why they were in the trailer. But no, I think in terms of favorite moments, it was the montage I talked about. Every scene with Peggy is great. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of favorite moments. But the film's just fantastic. The whole film. I loved going back to this one today.
Yeah, I'd say the only thing I probably scene I didn't like, or what it threatened to do, is obviously what you said, the scene with Natalie Dormer, and the scene where they threatened to turn Peggy into a two-dimensional, you know, classic jealous superhero girlfriend type. I'm glad that does get shut down almost immediately. I don't whoever's decision that was to not run with that as a storyline for the rest of the film, I think works.
I wonder if there was more to her character, because she seemed quite suspicious and Cap seemed quite cagey around her. I wonder if there was like a plot thread where maybe she was a Hydra agent, or because Natalie Dormer wasn't a big actress back then, was she? I have to keep sort of like putting myself in the mind of 2011 in that Game of Thrones hadn't started, or was just about to start that year, I think, wasn't it? But she didn't come into it until season 2, so she'd have been doing like a lot of TV things, probably similar to Richard Armitage. He's done the Hobbit films now. He's done a lot of other big films, but back then there was these actors that were mostly in the TV realm of things. So I'm looking at it now from 2021 going, oh, Natalie Dormer's a big actress. Like, why do they only give her like one scene in there? But maybe that was the case. It is weird. It does feel a little bit out of place. I guess you could say it reinforces the dynamic between, oh, you've got eyes for someone else, have you, when we were meant to having this date or waiting for the right partner or whatever it is. But yeah, it feels strange. I'm going to have to watch the deleted scenes, see if there was more to do with her character, because it does feel a bit out of place.
Definitely. So, with that being said, I think that's everything we can say about Captain America. One final thing, there is a Fantastic Four reference. Sorry, we won't get into it. We've spoke for way too long, but someone shouting, "Nice boots, Tinkerbell." Fantastic Four reference. That blew my mind. Someone put that on Twitter recently. That aside, we want you guys at home to comment your thoughts on Captain America: First Avenger. Where does it stand compared to the other Marvel films? Where is it compared to even the other Captain America films? He's a character that is easily, as we speak right now, of our little mini chat, he's top of the rankings. He's everyone's favorite so far, bar 2. So do stick around for that discussion. Comment below. And again, if you do like this video, then of course hit that like button. Do subscribe. We've got a hell of a lot more Marvel series coming your way. We've got the Falcon and the Winter Soldier spoiler reviews, which will be starting next Friday at 8 p.m. It is insane even thinking about this far ahead. We've just had WandaVision come and go, and here we are planning 2 out of 3. We've got Loki coming June the 11th as well, so God knows what happens there. But for the Infinity Saga Retrospective, we will also be back on Saturday the 13th of March. That is going to be for the main Avengers film. I'm very excited to be looking at that one. It's a film that I've not seen in quite a while. I'm looking forward to going back to. And of course, it fits in nicely into our mega schedule, which does round off phase 1. And then we'll have phase 2 commencing the following week on the 15th of Iron Man 3. So for the Avengers fans out of that, it's going to be fun. We're going to have more people on that one as well. We're increasing this guest count by a mighty 1 to make occasion. I don't know why or how, but we just decided there's going to be more people. So do come back and join us for that. Now, in the meantime, we've got loads of other stuff happening on the channel. We've got new reviews, we've got retro reviews, and of course, we've got the Cinema Savvy Awards, which are continuing every Thursday at 8 p.m. We're quite far into the series as we get nearer to the Oscars. It's going to be very interesting when we get there, but we're still going through some of the lesser-known categories. And, of course, the best way to find out about our content is getting us on our socials, which is Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and we have a link to TeePublic below. And, Theo, if we want to hand over to you some of the places we can find you, we've put your Twitter handle here as well.
Yeah, you can find me writing for World of Real at the moment. I think I've got a Cherry review coming out Friday, I think, and maybe a review on the new Billie Eilish documentary that's dropping on Apple TV as well.
So if you guys like the other films, do check that out. I've been delighted to have you back on again. I'm excited to get you on the next Marvel video. We've got you on a few more. It's been amazing talking about Captain America, and as well looking at that character journey from sort of 1940 to sort of 2019 where he finished. So this has been an episode of the Infinity Saga Retrospective. I want to thank everyone for watching at home, and be sure to join us for the next one. Thanks for watching.